are in coherent feeling and that even rhythm, that's what awakens your brain to send powerful healing chemistry, powerful immune response, powerful anti-aging hormones, awakens your senses, turns on the gamma. Okay, and when you are in the rough, jagged signal, that's fight or flight, your body and your brain are saying, something important is happening, we've got to run or fight, so we don't have time for healing, we don't have time for an immune response, we don't have time for anti-aging hormones, they're not important. So it shuts off those functions in preferential treatment of this fight or flight. So for this reason, you can see why fight or flight's good momentarily, don't want long term. We can shift these brain states very, very quickly. And what I'd like to do now is I'm going to share a technique with you to help to do this. We can measure this conversation between the heart and the brain electrically. And it is a very low frequency. So this isn't an esoteric essence of a prana or aura. This is an electrical and a magnetic frequency. And the electrical part is a very, very low frequency. It is 0.1 hertz. It's not even 1, 0.1 hertz. This is such a low frequency, you can't even hear this. It is right on the threshold between feeling and hearing. It's a frequency that whales use to communicate in the oceans. So it's a very universal frequency. It's also a frequency that military submarines use to communicate in the oceans, which is why it's a problem for the whales when they use it. And it is the optimal signal to harmonize your heart and your brain. So what this means is if you can create a feeling in your heart of 0.1 hertz, then that feeling is going to harmonize your heart and your brain. Now, in indigenous traditions that I've been with, they have techniques to do this. The Institute of HeartMath that I mentioned in the last episode, they have refined these techniques in the laboratory into very, very simple steps that make them accessible in our everyday environment, whether we're in an urban environment, whether we're in a military environment, a first responder environment. This technique is being used in all these environments that I'm mentioning now, in family and marriage and family counseling environments, in cardiac environments to help deal with blood pressure and cardiac events that are happening within our bodies. So there are a vast and myriad number of applications for the one technique that we're going to do right now, and this technique is the doorway for all the potentials that we've just listed. By achieving heart-brain coherence, it opens the door and we get to choose. It's like once we're in this place, now we can do this, 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 or this. We can do subconscious, we can go into intuition, we can simply use this technique before we go to bed at night to begin to sleep and trigger a healing within our bodies. We can do it first thing in the morning. We can do it before our yoga. We can do it before our martial arts. We can do it before our qigong, our healing practice, any of these things, because everything goes better with heart-brain coherence. Let's talk about how we can achieve a gamma brain state in our lives. When we are in the gamma brain state, we, as I said, we achieve this sense of unity consciousness. And this is something that the monks talk about all the time, the Tibetan monks and nuns, and the abbots, the higher order monks. We achieve super cognitive enhancement and super memory recall. If you've ever seen any of the very popular movies based on Jason Bourne, the Jason Bourne series, and I call this the Jason Bourne brain state because our intelligence agencies are actually training agents to achieve this gamma brain state for many of the benefits that I'm sharing with you right now. Super fast learning. If you want to learn something really fast, if you want to learn a language very quickly, if you want to memorize information in a book. And when I was in college, and I shared this in an earlier episode, I had full credit, 19 credits in my earth sciences major. I was paying out-of-state tuition. I had no money. I was working 3 jobs. One of those jobs was a job that lasted from midnight until 8 a.m. and my first class was at 10. I didn't have a lot of time for sleep or homework. Now, I didn't know then the details and the science of what I'm saying to you. What I learned then was through my experiences with indigenous people and my own personal experimentation. I learned how to be able to absorb information very quickly. You can imagine in a science major, biology, it's all about phyla and species and an earth sciences major. It's all about crystallography and mineralogy and crystal classes and x-axis and z-axes and y-axes and all those things. I had to memorize this stuff really fast. This technique that I'm going to share with you and this state is what gave me the ability to do that successfully. So super learning, super cognitive enhancement, super memory recall. We all take in the information. We have the ability to recall it. Super focus, really fast information processing. I mean, just like that. Gamma brain state is also a natural antidepressant. People who are in gamma, during the time they're in gamma, they're much calmer, and their body is not in the fight or flight mode, and it is not in the mode releasing the chemicals and the hormones that contribute to the depression. It also gives us access to the deepest states of intuition on demand, and this is the key. We all have intuition. Often our intuition happens when it happens. It happens when we're in the shower in the privacy of our own home and that very primal experience of water pouring over us. We have deep insights into our work or friendships or relationships. We get out of the shower and boom, they're gone. Where did they go? Or you're sitting at a traffic light waiting for a light to turn green and you don't know when that's going to happen, so you don't want to start anything. So you're just there, and it's in that openness when those insights come in. And then all of a sudden the light turns green and you're off looking at the vehicle in front of you or checking your rearview mirror, and those insights are gone. Those are spontaneous. How do you achieve that when you want it the most? On demand, gamma is the answer to that. And much more. And because of the link between the gamma brain state, high gamma brain state, and theta, where the healing happens, there's a direct link. Some of our deepest states of healing begin in the gamma brain state. So I'm just giving you some examples of how powerful this state is and why we would want to access this very powerful state on demand. So with all these benefits in mind, the obvious question is, how do we do it? How do we access this powerful state of consciousness? And this is one of those places where my direct experience in Tibet give me the opportunity to answer this question firsthand. So in season 1 of this series of Missing Links, I described the 1991 discovery of the 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart, sensory neurites, that are focused in the heart in a way that is called the little brain of the heart. It is a neural network, but it's not in the brain, it's in the heart. These sensory neurites are essentially brain cells, but they're not in the brain, but they function the way that brain cells do. They think, they feel, they remember independently of our cranial brain. And when I shared that with you, I also opened the door to the potential for the gamma brain state. Here's what I mean by that. In season 1, I shared a technique that's been developed in the laboratory that reflects what some of our most ancient and indigenous traditions have taught us about harmonizing the heart and the brain, 2 organs, into a single potent system in our bodies. So what we're really doing is we are harmonizing the neurons in the brain and the neurons in the heart. Two separate organs, the neurons are in 2 places. We're harmonizing them into a single potent system called heart-brain harmony, or more specifically, heart-brain coherence. So if this is new to you, I'm going to invite you to go back to season number 1 of Missing Links and check out the episodes where we're talking about harmonizing the heart and the brain and the specific techniques. I'm going to refer to them here, but I detail them, and I want you to know that detail is there. I'm not just glossing over this. So now that we understand that it's possible to harmonize the heart and the brain, and that through breath and focus, we may create this very powerful state of coherence. During his perilous journey to receive the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai are available today, gives us a reason to believe that the protection he received in his day is available for us as well. Step number 2, shift your focus using a technique that is called the quick coherence technique. The simple step of shifting your focus and your breathing awakens a network of specialized cells in your heart known as sensory neurites. And these sensory neurites set into motion a sequence of hormonal and electrical signals in your body that create an emotional opening for you to embrace a new point of view. Focusing your awareness in the heart is effective because while the brain typically perceives the world as filled with polarity, the heart does not. The heart is a non-polar organ. Many of the paradigm-altering discoveries regarding the human heart have been made by scientists at the Institute of HeartMath, a pioneering research organization dedicated to understanding the full potential of the human heart. By understanding the conditions of focus and breathing that create harmony in the body, a state technically known as psychophysical coherence, we can create those conditions to optimize the potential of the word codes in our own lives. The technique to achieve this harmony is appropriately called quick coherence, or the quick coherence technique, because it's been refined into 2 simple steps through the people at HeartMath. Individually, these steps send signals to the body that relieve stress and optimize our potential for healing, but combined, the technique creates a full body harmony that we typically experience in life when we feel safe and have a sense of well-being. Following is the quick coherence technique, adapted with permission from the HeartMath Institute. To use this technique, first, I invite you to begin by shifting your focus from your thinking mind to the area of your feeling heart. Sometimes it helps to gently touch the area of your heart with 1 or 2 fingers or an open palm in a way that's comfortable for you to direct your awareness away from your mind to your heart. Next, I invite you to begin breathing just a little slower than usual, as if your breath is coming from the area of your heart. And as you slow your breathing, I want you to know that you are sending a signal to your body and your heart specifically, a signal that you are in a place that is safe and that it's okay to turn your attention inward. The next step, I invite you to activate a positive feeling in your heart, as if that feeling is coming from the center of your chest. To the best of your ability, feel a regenerative feeling such as gratitude or appreciation, care or compassion for someone or something in your life. The key in this step is to do the best that you can do, to create the feeling to the best of your ability and then surrender to the feeling, fully embracing it while allowing it to radiate from your heart area to fill and permeate your entire being. These 3 simple steps create the conditions in your body to optimize the harmony and the coherence between your heart and your brain. Following step number 2, the 3rd step, is to listen to the wisdom code one more time. From the perspective of heart-brain connection that you've just created in step number 2, repeat the wisdom code that you've chosen, either silently or speaking it out loud. And without judging the ancient and sometimes awkward grammar or the poor sentence structure of these codes or the differences in translation, I'm inviting you to allow the wisdom and the intent of the message to permeate your entire being in the present moment. Ancient traditions, such as those of the monks in Tibet, typically speak their wisdom codes as they exhale their breath. So the technique is to continue speaking or breathing the lines of your wisdom code for a minimum of 3 minutes. Scientists have found that this is the minimal amount of time for the body to lock in its responses to the emotional shifts that you're creating through the word codes. For the 4th and final step, I invite you to simply notice how your body feels. Your body will respond quickly to the changes that you create in your awareness and your breathing. And while these changes may be subtle at first, they become more apparent as you become more attuned to the sensation. So now I invite you to pay attention to your physical sensations. The key here is to notice the difference that has occurred in your body from the beginning of the time that you began the word code process and now. And as with any other skill, the more you practice creating coherence between your heart and your brain, the easier it becomes to do so. Because all humankind shares certain fears, we have a universal sense that we sometimes need refuge and protection. Sometimes we feel a need to protect ourselves from forces that may be seen, such as an obvious physical threat. We know that we have neurons in the brain. We know that we have neurons in the heart. You are the only form of life that has the ability to harmonize the neurons in the heart and the neurons in the brain into a single potent system. 2 organs, 1 system. When you harmonize the heart and the brain, it's called coherence. The optimum coherence is a very low frequency. It's not even 1 hertz. It's 0.1 hertz. When you create the conditions in your body that allow 0.01 hertz, that is when you are at your best. Everything is connected in your body. Now I want to show you why this coherence is so important. We talked earlier about side effects with pharmaceuticals, side effects with nutrition, with anything. I want to show you why side effects are so important. That is the latest map of the interconnectivity of the metabolic functions in the human body. Can you read that map? Neither can anybody else. Because we are so complex. Look at how, from this, you can see why it's impossible to introduce a pharmaceutical into your body and not have that or a nutrient or a supplement. It's not just about drugs. Anything in your body that you introduce, it is going to influence other systems. If everything is connected, it means that when you create coherence between your heart and your brain, it's not limited to your heart and your brain. What else is influenced by the coherence? You tell me. Everything. This is the most powerful nutrient that you can give to your body, because when you create coherence between the heart and the brain and everything is connected the way it is, look at what happens. You directly awaken super longevity, because that coherence relieves the stress that prevents the telomerase from doing its job. It allows the telomerase to become active, relieving that stress, all right? Stress that you know, stress that you don't know. Heart-brain harmony, super immune response. When I was working with the researchers at the Institute of HeartMath, we'll talk about them when we come back from our break. They sent saliva samples out to independent laboratories for evaluation after the participants had been trained to do what we're about to do in here today. The labs called the scientists and they said, "What is this antibiotic that you guys are working with? We've never seen anything like this." The scientists said, "There is no antibiotic. This is SIGA. It's the first line of response in the human body, the immune response." They said, "We're using the body's natural responses." And the researcher said, "No way." They said, "This can't happen. You're using a pharmaceutical. You just don't want to tell us what it is." It was more powerful than the antibiotics. SIGA is your first line of defense, the antibodies in your mouth. Heart-brain harmony stimulates that immune response. But if you want a strong immune system, this is the way to go. But it doesn't stop there. Direct access to heart intelligence. We did this yesterday. It triggers over 1,300 positive biochemical reactions. In the interest of time, I will not go through all 1,300, and you'll be glad that I don't. It doesn't stop there. Resilience. Resilience to change. Resilience is all about heart rate variability. We're going to talk about that when we come back from the break. If you want resilience to change, you have to have greater heart rate variability. You're going to create that for yourself in just a moment. Super intuition on demand. Super access to the subconscious on demand. If you're using affirmations to change your life, you've got to speak to your subconscious in a language it recognizes. You've got to communicate with the subconscious. Heart-brain coherence is a hotline to your subconscious with no hypnotism, with no altered states. A direct access to your subconscious. Super learning, super memory, we talked about this yesterday. Super HRV, super cognition, and much, much more. So you get the idea. This is one of the most powerful forms of self-regulation available to the human body. This is also the secret of some of the most ancient spiritual traditions, some of the most ancient occult traditions. This is what they would do. They would learn to access their body, and what you do with the power from your body is determined by your values, where you are in your life. just going through the process without doing anything else has passive benefits right here, just from what, if you do nothing else but 3 minutes of heart-brain coherence. The recorded benefits, you are automatically going to awaken telomeres, you're going to awaken the immune response, you're going to have, if you wanted that heart intelligence, you're going to trigger those 1,300 biochemical reactions and you'll create greater heart rate variability just from doing what we're about to do. That is the nutrient, the most powerful nutrient. It's not a pill or a tablet. It's energy, it's a field, it's breath, it's emotion, it's focus. No other form of life can do what you're about to do. That is pure human technology. Nothing else is needed. And this is what we have the potential of losing if we give ourselves away to computer chips, to wires, to chemicals, where our neurons begin to atrophy, our biological potential begins to atrophy. But this transcends all of that. That traditional physics does not allow for. So the quantum physics is actually becoming a very good bridge when it is honored and used well. We have to respect the parameters of quantum physics.
We all kind of feel that is true, but we don't know how to prove it. Can quantum physics prove that, for instance, we are all connected and we can influence the world outside us?
Quantum physics has proven beyond any reasonable doubt that everything is connected to everything else.
This experiment, it was performed in Switzerland, University of Geneva, in July of 1997. 3,400 journalists were in the laboratory watching the experiment because it was so significant. Here is what happened. Atoms that make up our world are made of smaller particles called photons. A photon is a little particle of light. Just think of it that way. So a photon is the stuff this world is made of, okay? Scientists took one photon and they wanted to do an experiment, but they needed 2 identical photons, so they took one, they cut it in half to make 2 identical twins. Then they placed the 2 photons in a special chamber. And from that chamber, there was one tube that went 7 miles in this direction, one tube that went 7 miles in this direction, and each photon they fired into the separate tubes. What the scientists found is whatever they did to one photon in one place, the other photon had the same experience even though it was 14 miles away. Well, the phenomenon is called entanglement. It's when 2 things were once together, then they become physically separate. However, the energy is still connected.
There really is no longer a question if the connection exists. The question now is how deep is the connection? How much influence do we have within that connection? How do we use that connection? This was the great debate in the 20th century between the great minds of physics. Albert Einstein, for example, this was a source of frustration for him, and even to his last day on this earth. He did not really like the ideas of quantum physics. He didn't like the idea that we could influence physical matter from one place while the matter is in another place. The term he used, he called it spooky action at a distance. I love that term.
Yeah.
He didn't like the idea that spooky action at a distance was possible. At the same time, a colleague of Albert Einstein's, Professor John Wheeler from Princeton University, they lived at the same time, they were colleagues, they were friends, they studied the same mathematics and had very different viewpoints on our relationship to the world. So while Albert Einstein believed that we were separate from the world, John Wheeler
said that we are an integral part of the world. He said that we live in a universe that is still building itself.
Exactly.
He said that, and I love this about John Wheeler, he said that when we build the microscopes to look at the smallest elements of matter inside the quantum atom, and when we build the telescopes to look into the depths of space, what John Wheeler said was that we will never find the smallest particle of matter, and we'll never find the edge of the universe. He said because the act of us searching is an act of creation that will always place something there for us to see.
Beam of light, photons, particles of light, was fired from a device, and it was fired at a barrier, and the barrier had 2 slits on either side. And what scientists expected to see was that once the light hit the barrier, it would go through both of the slits, and we would be able to see the patterns that it was creating in a very expected way on the other side. Well, this is where the mystery comes in, because what scientists found is that when the light hit the barrier and it went through and it was being observed. Now, the observer could be another human, it could be a device watching it, but somehow the observation actually determined how those particles of light would behave. When no one and nothing was observing, the particles would behave in one way. When someone or a gadget was recording, the particles would behave in another way. And here's the difference. Under one set of circumstances, the particles remained particles. On another set of circumstances, the particles became waves. So now we're talking on a quantum level about the difference between the particles and waves. It's the same energy expressing in very, very different forms. Now, this is going to be really important because what we have just done is we've talked about the ability of humans to create the emotion that influences their DNA. It influences the stuff our world is made of. And now we're talking about the stuff our world is made of behaves differently. Sometimes it's a particle, sometimes it's a wave, depending on whether or not it's being observed. The implications for healing, the implications for prayer, the implications for remote healing within the context of these discoveries take on a whole new meaning. And if you think about this, we know scientifically that prayer has an effect. Many studies have been done, and the question was, how could a prayer in one person's living room for their loved one, their son or their daughter, their mother or father in a battlefield of Afghanistan, half a world away, how could the prayer have any influence on the other side of the planet? And yet it does. Statistically, what the studies were showing was that people fared better when they were ill or when they underwent a surgery. Those that had people praying for them fared better, recovered faster, had less trauma, less bleeding, less swelling, less bruising than those that did not. These are very, very well documented studies. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those. The question is, why does it happen? How does it happen? That's what we're spending time on, because we're going to take this now to the next level. We're going to take it even further than we have in the past, because it begins to tie in to what we have called miracles in the past. You know, a miracle is only a miracle until we understand the science underlying what's happening. Then it becomes a technology, and it's something that we all have available to us. Although the observer effect was first documented during the first double-slit experiments early in the 20th century, as happens so often with these very important experiments, this particular experiment was repeated later in the century using even better equipment with new ideas and new understandings. And I'd like to share with you precisely the exact language of what the scientists at the Weizmann Research Institute discovered when they repeated the double-slit experiment. In 1998, scientific headlines all over the world reported this experiment. And they read, and this is a quote, "Researchers at the Weizmann Institute of Science conducted a highly controlled experiment demonstrating how a beam of electrons," so these are quantum particles, "a beam of electrons is affected by the act of being observed." But even beyond that observation effect. That was noted early in the century, but listen to this. Listen to the new portion of this discovery. The scientist said, quote, "The experiment revealed that the greater the amount of watching, the greater the observer's influence on what actually takes place," end of quote. And this was actually reported in the very prestigious journal Nature, February 26, 1998, volume 391, if you want to look it up for yourself. This experiment is telling us that not only are we intimately enmeshed with the world around us and with the world within us, but the more focus, the greater our focus, the greater the attention that we give specifically something that is happening in our lives, the greater the effect. But I think this is interesting because we already knew this if we followed the principles in some of our most ancient, again, and cherished spiritual traditions. For example, in the sutra from the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, there is a statement that essentially summarizes what the Weitzman experience just told us. And that statement says, quote, "Reality exists only where the mind creates a focus." Reality exists only where the mind creates a focus. So the ancient Buddhist traditions, they didn't have the science, but they sure understood the principle. They understood the mechanism. Where we create this convergence of thought, feeling, and emotion, where we create that focus, that is us observing the world around us.
My question was, how far do these parallels extend? How programmable are we? And to what degree can we upgrade or upregulate our own technology? And this led me to look at DNA in a way that was very different than we were thinking of it back in those days. I mean, a lot of people just thought that cells were little sacks of water, with some cool stuff floating, including DNA, was just floating around inside the cell nucleus. And now we know, of course, that's not true. And I'm going to say this now, we'll tie into this as well, that the DNA actually is encapsulated in a protein that is called chromatin. And it is the way that the chromatin encapsulates the DNA that determines the quality of how the DNA can express itself in our bodies. So when that chromatin is locked down tight, I mean, you can just kind of visualize this. When it's locked down tight, the DNA is still there, it's still functioning, but it cannot function as efficiently. It cannot express as completely. And when it is looser, and the ability of the DNA to express is called spooling, S-P-O-O-L-I-N-G. So the way the DNA is spooling, or if genes are actually silenced, we have the ability to silence specific genes, is largely related to whether or not this chromatin is wrapped tightly or loosely. And this is the bridge. This is where it gets really interesting, because the chromatin responds to thought, feeling, emotion, breath, and focus.
I've seen some of the research, that shows that when we're, as you're saying, feeling and thinking and expressing more positive emotions, compassion, gratitude, things like that, love, everything within us relaxes, and as does that coiling or that spooling of the DNA. And yet when we are stressed, when we're negative, angry, then everything stresses up, it tenses, it tightens. And so it's almost like as it's wrapping around the histone, then into the chromatin, it's changing the conformation or the structure of the DNA and how much of it's even accessible to be expressed, or which genes can be accessed to build the amino acids and the proteins and so forth. And so I know that HeartMath had done some of this research, but are there other, and there's some epigenetics, of course, some of the work of Bruce Lipton and so forth. So what research have you seen that is indicating these keys of being able to access more of it?
Well, you just covered a lot of ground. So there is an emerging science. Bruce Lipton, our dear friend, spiritual brother, was actually doing the research back in the 1960s that became what we now today call epigenetics. He was taking cells, putting them in a petri dish. Same cells, different environments became expressed differently. They became muscle cell or bone cell or heart tissue or whatever it was. All that changed was the environment. The cell was exactly the same. So that was the foundation for what we now know is epigenetics. Epi is above, so it's above control, above the genetics. What you don't often hear about is we have what is called an epigenome. So most people are familiar with the genome, but the epigenome are the factors, the access points to the DNA. Some of these are very familiar and some are not. I mean, things like certainly diet, exercise, nutrition, supplements, the external environment, temperature, toxins in the environment, those all influence these the ability for the DNA to express. But one of the greatest epigenetic access points is the internal environment. And I'm just going to keep coming back to this. We self-regulate. Sometimes we're aware of it, sometimes we're not. But we self-regulate through thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, the way we think about ourselves, the way we feel about our relationship to the world, breath, and focus. So what this means is we live in a world that's changing faster than we've been conditioned to accept that change. And we've also been conditioned to hinge our sense of well-being, Teresa, on the world around us. And most people don't think about that. We don't wake up in the morning and talk about it at the breakfast table, but if there's relative peace in the world, stock market looks good, retirement, IRA, 401k, kids' education, everybody's healthy, and there's food in the fridge, we're feeling like it's a pretty good day. But when those things start to change, they create this tension in our body. So the unresolved stress, and we know it leads to inflammation. Well, that is the information that we're feeding into the genome. And the epigenome, and it makes a lot of sense. When we live in fear, these are all aspects of fear. We're tightening that chromatin, and the DNA isn't able to express as fully. And we see that our immune system, for example, takes a hit. And we all know this. When we live in stress, the immune system takes a hit.
Now, I want you to see the way this was written in the professional journals, because the languaging is very telling. First of all, it said that the light was described as behaving, quote, surprisingly and counterintuitively. Intuition says those photons should still be random. So it's counterintuitive that they would become ordered in the presence of the DNA. But then look at this next statement. It says we are forced to accept the possibility. It doesn't say, hey, look at what we found, look what we discovered, look what we observed, look at this curious effect. It says we are forced to accept the possibility that some new field of energy, well, we know it's not new, it's always been there, we're just recognizing it, that some new field of energy is being excited by the DNA. It is called the phantom DNA effect. That is the name of the effect that we're seeing here. It was published in the journal Nanobiology, 1995. All right, so what did we just do? What does this experiment tell us? That human DNA influences the stuff our world is made of. All right, that's a big deal all by itself, but this experiment is not done in a vacuum, although it was about a vacuum. The experiment is within the context of other experiments. So check out the second experiment. Experiment number 2, paper released 1993. The title of the paper sounds very complex. It's actually very simple. Local and non-local effects of coherent heart frequencies on conformational changes of DNA. What this experiment is telling us, scientists know that DNA in the human cell, it doesn't just lie there in one position. Okay, I mean, that's the way it's portrayed and we think of it that way, but the DNA is actually very, very mobile. And it is constantly moving and shifting position in response to a number of factors. That is epigenetics. It can be external environment, internal environment, thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, temperature, nutrition, diet, exercise, all those things. What this experiment is showing is that the heart produces frequencies that change the shape of the DNA, and the ability of the DNA to express fully is determined by its shape. All right.
So the heart is producing effects that determine whether or not that DNA can express fully. We are creating the effects in the heart that are creating the frequencies that are having that effect. All right, so here's the experiment. Here it is right here. And by the way, this was published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, 1994. That's why I wanted to put the all of the references there so you can see them. So this study was done, the Institute of HeartMath participated in this. 1993 is when the experiment began. It's published in 94. And what scientists wanted to know was, what effect does the human heart, the frequencies of the heart, have on DNA? They had pristine DNA they took from umbilical tissue. So it's very pristine, it's not damaged, it's not aged, it's not deteriorated. They isolated that DNA in a tube, within a tube. They allowed that tube to be in proximity, close proximity to the heart. It was in the same room. And when individuals trained in heart-based emotion, they were feeling in the presence of heart-brain harmony. All right, they were creating emotions of love, appreciation, gratitude, compassion, positive emotions. And look what happened in the presence of love, appreciation, gratitude, compassion. The DNA expanded. Now, that's important, because when the DNA relaxes and expands, it is allowed a full expression of all of the genes that are in that segment of the DNA.
So in the Missing Links series, there were a couple places where I talked a little bit about the discovery of telomeres, number one, the very special pieces of DNA at the end of each chromosome that determine in large part how long the chromosome lives and subsequently how many times that cell can divide. So I talked about that a little bit. I want to tie that into this conversation that we're having about diet and exercise, because everything I just shared with you, plant-based diet, foods that come from the earth rather than come from a machine that's produced them, supplements, then the supplements that we need in very specific proportions or ratios, the exercise in our lives that mimics the movements we would go through if we were living in a little closer to the earth, if we were living more active environments outdoors. Heart-brain coherence, every one of these things that I've mentioned is now being shown to have a direct effect upon our DNA in general, and specifically on the telomeres at the end of the chromosomes. So let me talk to you just a little bit about what that effect is. The purpose of the telomeres is very similar if we think of shoelaces. I'm wearing boots now, so I don't have the shoelaces to show you, but if you can imagine, at the end of shoelaces, typically there's a little plastic cap that keeps the ends from fraying. As long as that cap is there, those laces are easy to lace up on our shoes. Telomeres serve a very similar function on the end of the DNA. Every time the cell divides, the chromosomes divide, and the way the division, without getting really technical, the way the division happens, the ends of the chromosomes will become brittle and break off and will not go through the complete division intact, and that's okay. Nature has accounted for that by putting the chromosome or the telomeres on the end. So when the incomplete breakage happens, it doesn't happen in the juicy stuff where all the information is. It happens in the telomeres that are designed to be broken and shredded. So that's the good news. The flip side of the good news is every time the cell divides, the telomere loses a little bit of its length. That's okay, because it divides again, it loses a little bit more, but that's okay, there's still some there, it divides a little bit more. But you can see where this is going. Over time, it will lose so much, the telomere will become so short at the end of the chromosome that it cannot protect that division. And when that happens, we call it old age, we call it senescence, we call it death. So this is the determining factor for how many times a cell can divide, is how long those telomeres are. In 2009, Carol Greider and Elizabeth Blackburn, two Nobel Prize winning scientists, received the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for the discovery of an enzyme. And if you haven't seen the episode that talks about this, you're going to love the name of the enzyme. Okay, so telomeres are what give the cells the longevity. The name of the enzyme is called telomerase, and that tells the whole story. The sole purpose of the enzyme telomerase is to heal, rejuvenate, and lengthen the telomeres. The catch is something has to activate the telomerase. The reason I'm saying this now is because everything I said at the beginning of this episode activates the telomerase. Nutrition, exercise, supplements, and specifically heart-brain harmony. It's called heart-brain coherence. When we tune our heart and our brain so that the signal moving up through the vagus nerve and down through the spinal cord, so that signal is optimized at 0.1 hertz, very low frequency. When we can tune our heart and brain to 0.1 hertz, that is an optimum conversation. And one of the effects is it triggers the telomerase in our bodies. It activates that telomerase and can actually stop the aging process, reverse the aging process, and make those telomeres longer no matter how old we are. So this is the beauty of how the science is tying everything together, and it helps us to understand some of the traditions that I've studied where monks and nuns have lived exceedingly long lives, 120 years and more. But they don't look like they've lived 120. This is the key. There's one way of thinking that says we come into this world as a vessel, for example, a vessel of life, and we have X amount of life that we begin to use up from the moment we're born. And you've probably heard this term, that we begin to die the moment we're born. That's a way of thinking, and it's embraced by a lot of people. But the science is showing something very different. It's more accurate to say that we begin to heal the moment we're born. That the vessel of life, it's not a finite vessel that we begin to use up over time. It is a vessel that's being constantly replenished. And we replenish it through the choices of lifestyle that we make every day: nutrition, movement, supplements, heart-brain connection, what we call spiritual practices, all contribute to filling this vessel.
Took a look at the magnetic field of the Earth. And what they found is that when the frequencies of Earth, these are called Schumann cavity resonant frequencies, when these frequencies were up, every one of those heart rate variability readings went up. When the frequencies were down, the same thing happened. Scientists can't say that one thing causes something else. Rarely do you hear scientists say it's the cause. What they'll say is that there is a high correlation. So the correlation between the rise and the fall, the ebb and the flow of the magnetic fields of the Earth and the ebb and the flow of human heart rate variability was beyond coincidence. Said, my God, we are tuned, at least this small group of people. So they said, we need a bigger study. So they went with a larger study, 5 countries, 240 people, I think, were involved, 140 people were involved over 5 countries. And they collected over 150 million heartbeats to feed into the system. And when they got the information back, the researchers were, I don't think they were surprised, they were in awe. They were in awe because it was exactly the same results on a broader scale with many more people, 5 different countries. What it's showing is that we are deeply influenced by what happens, the magnetic fields of this planet. And this is important because it influences our mood, it influences our physiology, it influences our intuition, it influences our ability to work together and cooperate, it influences when we become aggressive and don't want to cooperate. All of these factors are now linked in to our relationship to Mother Earth, just as our indigenous ancestors have told us for a very long time. So here's the reason that this was important. In 2001, scientists made an initial discovery, and this was around the time, it was on the date of September 11th, 2001. It was on that date that the satellites in the northern hemisphere they were actually measuring, they measure the magnetic fields of the Earth, send back data to scientists every 30 minutes, because we're all tuned to these fields. Every blade of grass, every hamster, every goldfish, every CEO of every corporation, every leader of every nation is tuned to the fields. So there is no them and us when it comes to these fields. There is we, and because of that, scientists keep a very close track on what's happening with this field.
So they were used to seeing the data come back. It would ebb and flow every day, rise and fall, rise and fall. Scientists are very accustomed to seeing that. And one day, the data came back and there was a huge spike. And they said, what is that? What on earth? What on earth is going on the earth to cause that kind of a spike? And they overlaid it onto a calendar of time. And Steve, what they found is that the spike happened 15 minutes after the first plane hit the first tower of the World Trade Center. That was the 15 minutes that the images made it around the world through satellite networks onto people's televisions, and people were responding emotionally from their hearts what they saw. And there were a lot of responses. Some of them were fear, some were anger, some were sadness, but it was all heart-based emotion. So here's why I'm sharing this. Scientists believe it was on that day for the first time the data showed them that those hundreds of millions of people collectively have an experience, a heart-based experience, synchronized in the same moment in time. Our heart fields are so powerful magnetically that those fields coupled with the Earth's magnetic fields and actually spiked the magnetic fields of the Earth. Now this is a big thing for scientists because we've been led to believe we're separate from the Earth, that we're separate from one another, and that there is no way a human or a group of humans could possibly influence the magnetic fields of an entire planet. So what this showed, it was a tragedy, unfortunately, that led the scientists to understand that hundreds of millions of collective human hearts feeling genuine feelings of care, heart-based feelings in the same moment in time, have the ability to influence the magnetic fields of the planet in a positive way. This is important because if you remember, our listeners, if you remember even just a few days after what our world felt like, what our countries felt like, and for most of us, we were very close. America was very close. The world, we had a global family, at least for a few days. And scientists attribute that positive connection of many people to the stronger magnetic field of the Earth. When the magnetic fields are strong, we are less aggressive, more cooperative, more willing to open ourselves to one another and to our oneness. When the magnetic fields are low, we are, statistically, we're more aggressive, less cooperative, and we sometimes become a little isolated, a little defensive. So showed the scientists, and by the way, they were measuring this through the satellites, as we mentioned. It showed scientists that we have the ability to influence in a positive way the fields of our planet that reflect in our willingness to cooperate and become a global family. The studies that I just shared from last week show just the opposite now, not the opposite, but in the opposite direction. Not only do we influence the fields of the Earth, but the studies show that the fields of the Earth influence us.
Heart-brain coherence, every one of these things that I've mentioned is now being shown to have a direct effect upon our DNA in general, and specifically on the telomeres at the end of the chromosomes. So let me talk to you just a little bit about what that effect is. The purpose of the telomeres is very similar if we think of shoelaces. I'm wearing boots now, so I don't have the shoelaces to show you, but if you can imagine at the end of shoelaces, typically there's a little plastic cap that keeps the ends from fraying. As long as that cap is there, those laces are easy to lace up on our shoes. Telomeres serve a very similar function on the end of the DNA. Every time the cell divides, the chromosomes divide, and the way the division, without getting really technical, the way the division happens, the ends of the chromosomes will become brittle and break off and will not go through the complete division intact, and that's okay. Nature has accounted for that by putting the chromosome or the telomeres on the end. So when the incomplete breakage happens, it doesn't happen in the juicy stuff where all the information is. It happens in the telomeres that are designed to be broken and shredded. So that's the good news. The flip side of the good news is every time the cell divides, the telomere loses a little bit of its length. That's okay because It divides again, it loses a little bit more, but that's okay. There's still some there. It divides a little bit more. But you can see where this is going. Over time, it will lose so much. The telomere will become so short at the end of the chromosome that it cannot protect that division. And when that happens, we call it old age, we call it senescence, we call it death. So this is the determining factor for how many times a cell can divide, is how long those telomeres are. In 2009, Carol Greider and Elizabeth Blackburn, two Nobel Prize winning scientists, received the Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine for the discovery of an enzyme. And if you haven't seen the episode that talks about this, you're going to love the name of the enzyme. Okay, so telomeres are what give the cells the longevity. The name of the enzyme is called telomerase, and that tells the whole story. The sole purpose of the enzyme telomerase is to heal, rejuvenate, and lengthen the telomeres. The catch is something has to activate the telomerase. The reason I'm saying this now is because everything I said at the beginning of this episode activates the telomerase. Nutrition, exercise, supplements, and specifically heart-brain harmony. It's called heart-brain coherence. When we tune our heart and our brain so that the signal moving up through the vagus nerve and down through the spinal cord, so that signal is optimized at 0.1 hertz, very low frequency. When we can tune our heart and brain to 0.1 hertz, that is an optimum conversation. And one of the effects is it triggers the telomerase in our bodies. It activates that telomerase and can actually stop the aging process, reverse the aging process, and make those telomeres longer no matter how old we are. So this is the beauty of how the science is tying everything together, and it helps us to understand some of the traditions that I've studied where monks and nuns have lived exceedingly long lives, 120 years and more. But they don't look like they've lived 120. This is the key. There's one way of thinking that says we come into this world as a vessel, for example, a vessel of life, and we have X amount of life that we begin to use up from the moment we're born. And you've probably heard this term, that we begin to die the moment we're born. That's a way of thinking, and it's embraced by a lot of people. But the science is showing something very different. It's more accurate to say that we begin to heal the moment we're born. That the vessel of life, it's not a finite vessel that we begin to use up over time. It is a vessel that's being constantly replenished. And we replenish it through the choices of lifestyle that we make every day: nutrition, movement, supplements, heart-brain connection, what we call spiritual practices, all contribute to filling this vessel. Illustrate where this neural network is. This begins to tell the whole story. Look at where this neural network is. It's not at the bottom of the heart. It's at the top, near the places, number one, where the valves open and close to send the blood into our bodies. And number two, where the arteries and the vessels enter the heart so that the blood can come into the heart or leave the body. These neurons are around those specific places. Now, the way that the valves open and close send a pressure wave through the blood that is a language unto itself. Your heart speaks a language to your body through the pressure wave that is created every time the heart beats, and that pressure wave tells the body, it sends a signal, and it tells the body what kind of chemistry to release into the body, whether it's a stressful chemistry or if you're feeling safe, it's a healing and rejuvenating chemistry, or it tells the body what kinds of hormones need to be addressed and how to address those, all from the way that the valve is opening and closing. And that valve opening and closing is largely regulated through these neurons, and the neurons are responding to you and the way that you feel about yourself, about your relationship to the world. If you feel safe, if you feel threatened, if you feel a sense of well-being, or if you feel a sense of high anxiety, chronic anxiety, with no way to reconcile that anxiety.
So that is one function of these sensory neurites near the valves. They're doing the same thing near the arteries, the blood that enters, the blood that leaves. These are regulating blood pressure and the way that blood is flowing in the body. You and I live in a stressful world. Our world is changing, as I mentioned earlier, and we're not being given any way to reconcile the stress. We're not given any sense of where the change is leading. All we know is that what we used to know in the past is gone, and we're in the middle of some event that is changing our families, our communities, our society, our nations. It's changing the way we work. It's changing the way we think about money, about security, all of that. But we're not really being given a way to reconcile that so that we have relief from the stress. That's why I want to share this technique with you, because you and I are going to self-regulate our body to give our bodies relief from the stress within, even though nothing may have changed in the world around us to give us that relief. This is a very, very high form of mastery. When you can find relief from a stressful world, even though the stressful world is still out there. It's a very, very high form of mastery. So I want you to see that we're dealing with something that is real. New scanning technologies now make this even more real. What you're going to see is a three-dimensional scan of the human heart where this neural network resides. So what you're seeing right now, this is the scan. I love this technology. And the yellow that you see near the top of the heart, this is where the neural networks or the neural network of the sensory neurites resides. I'm going to highlight it for you right there. You can see it. So this is important because once you see this, you cannot unsee it. Once you see this, you have a sense that you're dealing with something real and that you are communicating with a physical part of your body that simply is not acknowledged in the mainstream. Typically, that's beginning to change. I want to go through just a few of the key organs and share with you how quickly and what periods of time they typically regenerate. So what you're seeing on your screen is an illustration of some of the key places in the body where this regeneration happens. DNA, for example, renews itself every 2 months. Every 2 months of our lives, the DNA is replicating in a way that allows a new template to be put into place. So what that means is if you're happy with your body and you're happy with the expression of your DNA, there's no need to do anything. If your body is showing you something that you'd like to change, or that something that medical doctors are saying to you, you must change, this is an opportunity. It's a potential. It's another way of thinking, a very different way of thinking, of going in and changing that template, changing the blueprint for the next expression of your DNA. Your skin rebuilds itself in about a month. Your liver rebuilds itself in about 6 weeks. Your brain, you have a brand new brain after about 1 year. And this is so interesting to me because when I was in school, once again, back in the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, I was taught that there are certain organs and certain tissues in the human body that do not regenerate. Now we know every organ in the human body has the ability to regenerate and replicate and heal itself. Even the organs and the tissues we were told could not. Brain tissue, spinal cord tissue, pancreatic tissue, for example. Your blood rebuilds itself in about 4 months. Now, be really careful about what I'm saying here. When you give blood, for example, you have blood drawn for medical tests, the blood serum replenishes itself very quickly, but the red blood cells, it takes about 4 months for the blood cells to actually rebuild itself. So the volume replaces itself quicker, but the actual red blood cells take a little bit longer. Your bones, you build a whole new skeleton in about 90 days, in about 3 months. So from these examples, we can see how the growth of our body is intermittent. It's not solid, it's not continuous, it's not constant. There are cycles. And if we know how those cycles work, and if we know those cycles are based upon a pulsed reality, and if we understand our relationship to that reality, we are empowered to participate. And be very clear with this word. We're not talking about control. I'm not talking about manipulation of the human body. I'm talking about you consciously participating with the health and the healing of the vehicle that gives you the opportunity to express your love in this world.
So now that we understand this intermittent reality, this pulsed reality that is expressed as our bodies in the world, the question becomes, how do we actually interact? How do we change that blueprint of our body or of the world beyond our body?
So some of those benefits were passive, as I mentioned. They're rejuvenating longevity, rejuvenation of the cells, immune response, resilience to change, all of that. Some of them are active, where we drop into this program, if you will. We're thinking of the body as a system. And within this operating system of the human body, we have programs, and we actually drop programs into the programs. So when and the beauty of this is that you don't have to know any of it. But by following the principles of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions that are all about the heart, focusing on the heart, forgiveness from the heart, love, compassion, understanding. The whole Buddhist tradition is an inner technology based in compassion. We don't have to understand the physics and the biology. We can follow the practice. But now the physics and the biology and the genetics and the epigenetics are all telling us why those practices are so effective and how much further we can take them as we apply this new understanding of our inner technology to the world and to the challenges and the changes that we've never seen before. So it begins with this inner technology. Now, what I did not say, I promised I would elaborate. I think most of you know, and I mentioned earlier in the program, I am a degreed geologist, an earth scientist. And when I began to understand what I'm about to share with you, it just sealed the deal for me. Not that I had any doubts of my potential or your potential, but when I began to see this science, it told me to an even greater degree why we are such powerful beings and how much power we really have. So check this out. What you're seeing here, and I don't want this to be technical, so just think in terms of themes, all right? What you're looking at is a measurement of a form of magnetics for the planet. Now, some of you have read or heard, even me years ago, talking about what are called Schumann resonances. That's not what this is. Schumann resonances are atmospheric resonances. They're called cavity resonances, the cavity of the atmosphere above the planet. That's not what this is. These are magnetic fields within the Earth. They're called field line resonance frequencies. All I want you to see, look at the first big spike where that red arrow is. Guess, just take a wild guess. Take a wild technology, consciousness, and evolution guess. That's the name of this program. What that frequency is, but don't answer it. Let me give you a clue. There's the clue right there. It's not 0, it's not 0.2. That spike is 0.1 hertz. If that looks familiar, it's because we just talked about it. 0.1 hertz is the optimum frequency between the heart and the brain to harmonize two organs into one system, the neurons in the heart, the neurons in the brain, harmonizing into one system. And the beauty of this is that we create that harmony through the choices that we make to feel the feelings, to have the emotions in our heart that send that 0.1 hertz to the brain. The easiest of those emotions, they're all positive, life-affirming emotions. The easiest of those emotions is perhaps gratitude for anything or anyone, appreciation, care, compassion. You notice love is not one of those words. The scientists tell us that love means different things to different people. And for some of us, love has not been a good experience. So the word love may not work to harmonize the heart and the brain. However, this is so beautiful. When you think about it, gratitude is an expression of love. Care is an expression of love. Appreciation, compassion, they're all expressions of love. So ultimately, we're using love. We're just not using the word love, all right? So having said that, we create that 0.1 hertz between the heart and the brain.
He had affirmations all over his house, all over his car, all over his cubicle, little post-it notes, millions of them, well, hundreds of them, that he said millions of times a day, that all said exactly the same thing. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. And I asked him, does it work? He says, I say them a million times a day. I said, does it work? He said, no. And I said, why? And his answer to that is the key to what's happening here. He said, no, it doesn't work. I said, why do you think it is? He goes, look at me. Who would ever want to be with somebody like me? I'm an engineer. And he did. He said he wears the same, and I'll vouch for this, he wore the same clothes to work 3 out of the 5 days out of every week. And his life was all about work. But that's the key. His thought was, my perfect mate is manifesting for me now. In his emotion, he even didn't think that he was a good partner. So when he created his feeling, how could he possibly draw a partner into his life? Because the thought was, my perfect mate is manifesting for me now, but the emotion was the fear that he wasn't worthy of a partner. And this is where the technology comes in. You could have the same thought, pump in a different emotion, create a different feeling, and create different effects. That's a technology. If he had the thought, my perfect mate is manifesting for me now, and the love of what his life would be like in the presence of that partner, can you see how that would be a whole different effect, a different feeling? And it would probably create different experiences in his life. Feeling and belief are very closely related, very closely associated. So when I talk about beliefs and the placebo effects, or I talk about feelings and the monasteries that we're going to, we're talking about a heart-based experience. Can you see why that is? Are you okay with that? Make sense? Does it? Okay, good. So, the question, how do you know if you're having a thought or if you're having a feeling? You ever wonder that? This is one of the places really difficult. It's a very subjective experience. It's hard to talk about. A lot of speakers simply won't go there because it is hard to talk about. But I wanted in our 90 minutes today, I wanted to work with this a little bit just to give you a sense of the difference between a thought and a feeling. Are you okay if we do this a little bit? How many of you wonder, do you ever have a question about the difference between a thought and a feeling and an emotion? How do you know? Well, you know the definition. I've given them to you, but what does that mean in terms of an experience? And I think experience is the only way to really maybe differentiate between the two. People's lives, people's experiences, and especially when they are in deep devotional experiences, seem to give us a lot of feeling. Nature, like the ruggedness, the sheer ruggedness of a Tibetan glacier, that's a feeling-based experience. But we begin to see things like people. But when we talk about people, it seems like the closer we get to them, the more we begin having the feeling. And we see the devotion in their eyes. Do you have any kind of feeling when you're looking at him? The ability to do surgical procedures on a fetus before they're born so that when they are born, the condition that may have impaired them is healed by the time they come out of the womb has reached advanced stages now. I think you're all aware of that. In the year, I think it was 2000, this amazing documentation occurred of something that apparently happens frequently. We just don't get to see the pictures. What happened was this. There was a young baby boy. He was in his mother's womb, and he had a spinal condition. So they were doing a routine surgery on this baby boy, doing a spinal operation. Now, here is the catch to the whole thing. The catch is that his mother was anesthetized because he's hooked up to his mother's blood supply. He is believed to be anesthetized as well. So here's the catch. What they do is they open up the mother's tummy, they pull her uterus out of her tummy and lie it on her chest to perform this procedure. Because while the womb sac was sitting outside of the body on the mother's tummy, and both were believed to be anesthetized, the most amazing thing happened. The doctor had opened the womb. He was working on this boy's spine, and all of a sudden, this boy reached with his hand out through the slit in the womb into the air, and he grabbed the doctor's finger. Now, there was controversy as to whether or not this actually happened. And I went directly to the source, directly to the site, and when you see what you're going to see, there's little doubt. The doctor is holding the finger. There's no doubt that the finger is grasping consciously the hand. This is what happened. Look at this. Here is the womb sac. Here's the mother's tummy right here. Here's the womb. Here is the hand. If there's any doubt about what you're seeing here, this hand is firmly wrapped around that finger. And when the doctor tried to pull away, the grasp didn't give up. And he shook this little baby's hand, and then he put his hand back into the womb, closed it up, and he was born healthy and happy a few weeks later. And this little boy now has a picture of his hand before he was born that very few people get to see. Isn't that a powerful story? It's a powerful story of life. Okay, so those are stories. They elicit a feeling. Do you have a feeling in your body? That's very different than looking at geometric circles and squares or even beautiful mountains and sunsets. The stories about life itself. This helps us to understand the difference between thought and feeling. Because it's different for every one of you, you now have to identify that difference for yourself. What is it that feels different about these stories than looking at a white circle on a black background? That's the language. That is the language that you were born with that speaks to the stuff our world is made of. Okay, so you okay with that? What is it that makes that feeling so powerful? Why is that feeling, why does it have any effect beyond your body? Yeah, you say, okay, I'm feeling that, and I can see where it might trigger some brain chemistry in my body, but how could it affect this plant next to me? Or how could it affect the healing of a person on the other side of a barrier that I can't even see?
The human heart, when I was in school back in 1950s, 60s, early 70s, I was taught that the heart is with the brain is the master organ in the body. I'm just going to ask, how many of you were taught the brain is the master organ in the body? I was too. And, the brain is important. There's no doubt about that. The brain's important. But now what we know is that the brain receives much of the instruction that tells the brain what to do comes from the human heart. And the human heart creates those instructions based upon the way we feel about the world around us and about the world within us, our perceptions. Not even what's real, it's what we perceive as being real. So when we perceive, when we sense that we're not safe, for example, and we live in constant anxiety, and we live in constant vigilance, our heart is sending a very specific kind of signal to the brain, and the brain is responding by flooding the body with the chemistry that matches that signal. So if you feel that you're not safe, here's what happens. Your body does one of two things. You're either in regeneration and rejuvenation mode, or you are in survival mode. It's hard for the body to do both simultaneously. So if you feel that you're constantly in a state of fear, that you're not safe, then your body shuts down the healing response. It shuts down the rejuvenation and the regeneration response because your body says, we've got to deal with survival. So it's interesting because we scientists believed that we knew so much about the heart transplants. First transplants in 1960s, South Africa, DeBakey, I think some of you remember the first heart transplants when they were happening. And we now do about 10,000 heart transplants a year. And for the most part, they're successful. And because they are so successful, scientists say, well, we must understand pretty much everything there is to know, or we wouldn't have this level of success. So imagine their amazement. A discovery was made in 1991. It was published in 1994 of a new class of cells. They're called sensory neurites. Scientists discovered about 40,000 specialized cells in the human heart. 1991, it's published in the journal. Look at the name of the journal. The name of the journal tells the whole story. The journal is called Neurocardiology. Neuro means what? Cardiology is what? Heart, brain. This is a new journal made to reflect the power of these discoveries. Neurocardiology, Oxford University Press, 1994. The heart's nervous system contains about 40,000 specialized cells in the heart. They are configured in a way that makes a neural network, but the neural network is in the heart. It's not in the brain. These are brain-like cells, but they're not in the brain. In the cranial brain, they're in the heart. So scientists actually call this now the little brain in the heart. You can Google it. Don't Google it now, but later. Later you can Google it. It's actually called the little brain in the heart. Now, this is a very, very powerful discovery by science, because almost universally our ancestors, ancient traditions, indigenous traditions, always told us that the heart is really where the action is. I did an experiment a few years ago, and we were doing pilot programs with young people. So first we started with programs with second graders, 8 or 9 years old. I don't have any children of my own, so I have to think about the age groups. I'm getting better. So yes, is that right? 8 or 9-year-olds, second grade approximately. Then we did middle school, and then we did high school seniors. And I asked these young people, I'd say, when you find yourself in this room, can you show me, where are you? And almost universally, they go, I'm here. It's just this real, I'm here. Or when I talk to indigenous people from throughout the world, I said, you live here on earth. Where are you right now? I'm here. It's almost a reflex. We don't say, I'm here. We say, I'm here, because the heart, we know the heart is the seat of this very, very powerful experience. I'm just going to ask a couple of telling questions. What's the first organ that developed in your body when you were in your mother's womb? Take a wild guess. It's the heart. And you know, we still don't know. To this moment, scientists cannot answer the question, what happens? What happens when one moment there's this little bundle of cells that are just sitting there, and the next moment a heartbeat happens? What was that? What caused that heartbeat? Scientists have all kinds, they talk about sodium ion potentials across cell walls and all these kinds of things. But you know what the indigenous people say? Right up here down there in northern New Mexico, I'm in Colorado now. In northern New Mexico, and when I was with the Tibetans, they tell me the same thing. I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time in Tibet in the 90s and early 2000s, and that's going to be important here in a little while. Tibetans tell me the same thing. They say that first heartbeat is the moment that the power of the soul enters the physical body. Isn't that interesting? Now, as a scientist, I can't talk about the soul scientifically because it's not acknowledged scientifically, but we all know that there is something there. There is a power, there's an energy. And one of the fascinating things to me, I'm a scholar, and I've spent a lot of my life researching texts that were either deleted from popular religious texts, the 43 books that were removed from the Christian Bible, for example, or the books that were removed from the Hebrew Bible, or the Gnostic traditions that were discovered in the 1940s, or some of the other traditions. All of these traditions, so fascinating to me, they tell a story of the creation of the human body. And they all say that we are the product of an intentional creation, number one. They always say that when they created the human body, not he or she, but they, suggesting that there was a group of some kind. And they all say that the first human bodies were not capable of sustaining the power of light or the power of the soul in the physical world, that it took multiple iterations, multiple attempts, multiple formulas of DNA to find the right formula for the genetic blueprint that would hold the power of the soul in the physical world. Isn't that interesting? It's not science. I'll be very clear. I can't say that as a scientist. But when you see a story across such disparate traditions that has such a similar theme, I don't know that the story is true, but there's usually some element of truth in that. As a geologist, I saw this. Almost universally, ancient traditions tell about a great flood. They say there was a great flood that swept the earth, and each tradition talks about what that flood meant to them.
If you look at this image, the magnetic field is the shape that is called a torus. It's like a donut. It extends from the heart 3 to 5 feet physically beyond the physical heart, and forms this image, this pattern. Realistically, it's believed the field goes much, much further. That 3 to 5 feet is a limitation of the equipment being used to measure the fields. So it is suspected that on the quantum level, the energy from your heart and my heart extends infinitely. Infinitely. Probably no surprise to you. But this is what science knows right now. So this isn't the aura, this isn't the prana, it's not a new age, new thought hypothesis. This is rock solid science. This is an electromagnetic field extending beyond the strongest bioelectrical and biomagnetic field in your body. It's not the brain, it's the heart. So if you look at it in cross section, it should look familiar because it looks like the cross section of the magnetic field of the earth. When you harmonize your heart and your brain, what you're doing is you're bringing these two fields into alignment, just like you're seeing right now.
It's a powerful visual. You'll think about this a lot because this is where your mastery comes from. When you can create this harmony in your body, you're doing this, you're programming your soft technology to create this harmony. And once that harmonious place is created, it's up to you in terms of how you apply it in your life. All kinds of things you can do from this place of harmony. So that's what the rest of this program is all about. This 0.1 hertz is the doorway to the healing, the regeneration, the rejuvenation, and so much more. Now, let me give you a little example here. What you're seeing on your screen, you've seen before. These are neurons, living neurons inside of a human brain, living human brain. And they're firing randomly, and that's the point. I want you to see each neuron is firing randomly. What would happen if you could harness all of those neurons to fire simultaneously? If you could harness the energy from all of those neurons as they light up simultaneously, harness that energy and direct it to the healing in your body or any of the other functions of heart-brain harmony that we're talking about. What would that look like? Well, let me show you what it looks like. This is another experiment. This was done in a Russian laboratory. This is not a human brain. It is the brain of a zebrafish, but it will illustrate the principle very, very clearly. Look to the left of your screen, and what you're going to see is over 90% of the neurons are going to be triggered so that they will fire simultaneously. This will answer the question, what does it look like? There it is right there. Look at that. Look at that. Over 90% of those neurons. Now, for a zebrafish, the reason this is happening is the fish, this was a living fish, it was faked out into thinking it was swimming in a current that was at odds with the current it was already swimming in, and it had to rebalance itself quickly. So that's a survival. That's a survival moment. So for the fish, what it's saying is, I'm just going to, I'm going to paraphrase what that zebrafish brain is saying. It's saying, I better get as much energy as I can and direct that energy into the parts of my body that need it the most to course correct, or nothing else is going to make any difference. The world looks like when young people grow up believing that they live in a world of cooperation rather than a dog-eat-dog world where they have to fight for everything tooth and nail, and that something is out there to get them every time they make a wrong move, and that they're connected to their friends, they're connected to their family and the earth, they aren't separate from their family. That's where the real change begins. For we adults, I'm in my 60s now, I am now coming full circle with what this information means to me. And what it does is it reinforces what I've always sensed intuitively, but never had anything real to hang my intuitive beliefs upon. Once we see it as a scientific study, and you say, well, my God, they just proved what I felt. Now there's no question, and you embrace that in your heart, and your self-esteem changes in response to that as you begin to feel part of rather than separate from the world.
Yeah, I'm into that. And even right now, Gregg, you can feel into this. It's not just something cognitive. This oneness,
Sure.
Which is what meditation is, right? Or prayer, where we close our eyes and we just go into that place of feeling and of deep connection. And all of these things that are shared about meditation, that the feelings of bliss and peace and grace and beauty, we can feel into that. That's the one presence. That's our real essence. Yeah, Gregg.
So I'm going to follow up on that, something you and I talked about a little earlier. I want to give you all something concrete that you can take with you from this program, and I'm going to base it on science. 1991, scientists discovered, to their surprise, every heart has about 40,000 specialized cells that are called sensory neurites. They're in the heart. They're like brain-like cells, but they're not in the brain. They're in the heart. But they are put together they're concentrated in such a way that they're actually called the little brain in the heart. And the reason I'm saying this is because the little brain in the heart, those cells, they think independently of the cranial brain. They remember independently of the cranial brain, and they feel independently of the cranial brain. So when we are talking about connection, if we want to improve our self-esteem and feel more connected,
make those connections, it's not going to happen so much with the brain. The brain gives us the information, but it's about the feeling that we have from the information. So one of the ways to access these 40,000 cells in I've spent a lot of time since the 1980s with the monks and nuns and the abbots in the monasteries of Tibet and Bolivia and Peru and Nepal and India and all through the desert Southwest, learning from our ancestors. What is it they know that we've forgotten? Or what do they know that we're only now beginning to understand? And every one of them, as different as they are from one another, as different as their traditions are, they always begin their healing and they begin their connectivity by moving into their hearts. Now we know they're moving into these 40,000 sensory neurites. And one of the ways that they do that, if you're listening to this and you're driving or operating heavy equipment, please don't close your eyes right now. But if you're in a safe place, you can close your eyes. One of the ways they do this is they will close their eyes, and just closing your eyes sends a powerful statement to your body. It means that you are now shifting your focus from the outer to the inner world. I know most of you know that, but I want to share with you what it's doing. It sends a signal to your body that there's a shift in awareness. They then gently touch their heart center in a way that's comfortable to them. So sometimes they'll use just a couple of fingers or an open palm. In Buddhist traditions, they use the mudra like this. I'm not saying you have to do that, but if you can touch your heart center gently, what that does, your awareness will always go to the place in your body where you feel the touch. So when you touch your heart center, your awareness automatically moves to your heart. Now you are focused in the area of those 40,000 sensory neurites. And then you slow your breathing just a little bit, maybe 5 seconds on the inhale or the exhale. And that shift of the slower breathing tells your body that you're in a place that is safe. It tells your body that you're safe. And it's from that place that you can now shift your awareness into your heart and begin a dialogue. This is a place where your heart intelligence, your heart wisdom becomes more accessible. It's always available to you, but where it becomes really accessible because it is the focus. It's in this place where you can ask the questions that seem to have no answers, or that you can simply not ask any questions at all. Just simply be in deep communion with your own body, with the earth, if you're outdoors in nature, with another person halfway around the world, or in another room in the house, or in a chair right across from you. The distance doesn't make any difference. It's from this experience that we begin to harmonize with those magnetic fields that I talked about at the beginning of the program. And the next step, the last step, is if you can feel, to the best of your ability, a positive, life-affirming feeling while you are focused in your heart. And the researchers, scientists at the Institute of HeartMath have found words like gratitude, appreciation, care, compassion. Those 4 words, any one of those 4 typically will work for almost anyone.
Not only are we not told that we're powerful, we have been led and conditioned in our culture and in our families and our society to believe that we are not powerful, and that power lies somewhere else, that it lies with a church, or it lies with an organization, or it lies with a doctor, or it lies with a scientist, or someone who has knowledge and power that we do not have. And so when we find ourselves faced with situations in our lives that push us to the very edge of who we believe we are, we believe that we have to go to someone else. So it's about personal responsibility, personal power, recognizing that we are part of rather than separate from our world. And it's not about controlling or manipulating or imposing our will. It's about us participating and cooperating as a living organism that we call humankind to shape the destiny of our future. And that's why I'm so excited, because every person is a key element. The key, Robin, is unresolved frustration, unresolved anger. Mm-hmm. That's where we get in trouble with our bodies. We all feel those are. We all feel them because they're signals telling us about our environment, what's happening in the world. We want to feel those. The key is when we do feel them to recognize what they're saying and what to do about them, what they mean to us personally, and to resolve and reconcile whatever it is that is being brought to our attention in that moment. And the language of our heart speaks to the stuff our world is made of, to our bodies and to the physical reality of this world. The world will mirror back what it is that we're feeling in our hearts. When we're feeling anger, hate, jealousy, rage, you're going to see it in your relationships, you're going to see it in your health, you're going to see it in your body. Intuitively, we know that. And the flip side works as well. The key is to hone that feeling of peace or of healing, to feel the things as if they've already happened, to feel the peace in our world as if it's already happened, or the healing in our loved ones as if that healing has already happened. And in that way, we are giving this field something to work with, so it can mirror that back in the quantum world. And there are all kinds of self-help. Everyone learns differently, so what works for my anger and your anger or someone else's may not be the same thing. But the key is to honor the language of human emotion in our hearts. Forgiveness is vital. It's necessary for us to move forward in our lives. We'll all have experiences where we feel betrayed or hurt, where we feel that something has been taken from us by those who had power over us, either physically, emotionally, materially, something like that. We'll all have those experiences. The key to transcending those is to get past them, and you can't get past them by sweeping them under the carpet. Compassion is the word that the Buddhist traditions, we go in those monasteries in Tibet, they look at what's happened to their lives and what they've lost, and you're hard pressed to find an angry Buddhist in the monasteries in Tibet. And in the pre-Judeo-Christian traditions, there was a sect called the Essenes, Essenes. They wrote entire texts about how we get through those times in our lives, and they said what we do is we bless the things that hurt us. When we bless the things that hurt us, we're actually acknowledging, bringing that forward. You're saying, yes, it happened, and then that allows them to work through that energy and to transcend the energy. When you bless something long enough, it's just something that everyone has to experience on their own. It actually changes chemically what happens in our bodies. And when we understand that the world around us, and this is the language of quantum physics, when the world around us, we understand it's nothing more and nothing less than a mirror of what we have become from within. Our anger, our hate, our rage, our jealousy, as individuals, is mirrored around us, and collectively, our love, our compassion, our forgiveness, our understanding. So I think this is the generation that gets to learn that new way of being and embrace. And I acknowledge as a scientist, this is a very different way of thinking about the world. It's very different from what I was taught and trained and conditioned on the one hand. On the other hand, it's what the science is showing, and the evidence. We can talk about the experiments, and the evidence is out there showing that the emotions that we hold in here become the physical reality in the world around. They literally turn the atoms off and on of the stuff that our world and our bodies are made of. And that is a huge statement to make, and it's a very, very empowering way to look at the world. When we choose peace and healing and love and compassion and forgiveness and understanding and tolerance in our hearts, we know that changes the chemistry in our bodies, and we're healthier. That's a fact. We also know that those changes extend to the world around us, into our communities and families, in ways that can be measured, and that's a fact. And with those two facts, I think that we can move on in this 21st century and not let the frightening conditions of the world disempower us. We can look at that world square in the eye and say, yes, these things have happened, but there's a power within us. Maybe we'll outgrow the need for war.
In the Mayan traditions, you see an open palm right on the heart. In many of the Middle Eastern traditions, you see the same thing. In the Buddhist traditions, you see a prayer mudra that physically touches the sternum. The key is, any of those things creates a gentle touch, a physical sensation right over the heart center, and your awareness will always go to the place where you feel the sensation. That's the key. So if you can create a touch over your heart, your awareness will go there. First step. Second step, very simple. Slow your breathing a little bit slower than typical. Maybe 5 seconds inhale, 5 seconds exhale. And here's why that's powerful. Because the only time you would ever slow your breathing and breathe in that way is when you feel safe. When you feel that you're in a place that's safe and you're not threatened and you're not vigilant of your surroundings. So you're telling your body you're in a place that's safe. Slow your breathing. Third step, and this is the key, is to begin to feel the feeling. that creates 0.1 hertz. Feel the feeling that sets up the coherence between your heart and your brain. How do we do that? I gave it away earlier, I've already mentioned it. Scientists have found at the Institute of HeartMath, their researchers have found that there are 4 key words that work almost 100% of the time for everyone. Appreciation for anything or anyone, gratitude for anything or anyone, care, and compassion. If you can feel one or some combination of those feelings in your heart while you're breathing as if your breath is coming from your heart, touching your heart center, now you're setting up this communication between the heart and the brain. Now you are triggering those neurons to begin to reach out and find other neurons to strengthen this connection. And that's why I mentioned before, it takes about 72 hours, 3 days to build these networks. So that means the more you do what we're about to do right now, the stronger this connection becomes in your life. Let's try this. Let's go through this together. And this is the way we're going to close out our segment today. I'm going to invite you first to shift your awareness from your mind into your heart by gently touching your heart center. Okay? And once you're there, breathe a little slower than you typically would. Maybe 5 seconds inhale. 5 seconds exhale. And as you breathe, feel your breath coming from your heart and begin to feel those feelings. Compassion, gratitude, care, appreciation. To the best of your ability. To the best of your ability. And I'm going to do the same. Okay. And what researchers have found is that typically 3 minutes, only 3 minutes of doing what we have just done will set into motion a cascade of events within your body, biochemical events that will last as long as 6 hours. The immune response, the SIGA response, first line immune in the white blood cells of your mouth, they are reflecting this effect for up to 6 hours after you actually create the experience. So I mentioned that we can do this any time of day. You can do it before you sleep at night, first thing when you wake up in the morning. This technique, as simple as it seems, is the powerful key to awaken the greatest potential in your life.